Syntax of infinitive absolute. Now we'll turn to the syntax of the infinitive absolute. Like the infinitive construct, the infinitive absolute has both nominal and verbal uses. Now we said in the last chapter that the infinitive construct tends to be more nominal and the infinitive absolute more verbal in terms of its usage. And it's certainly true that the infinitive absolute is more verbal. In fact, Ross gives us 4 categories of verbal uses and doesn't give us any nominal uses at all. I would say that, actually upon reflecting on it a little bit, that the infinitive construct is kind of evenly split. We had 2 modules there. We had one dealing with nominal usage, and we had one dealing with verbal, and there were quite a few verbal. Be, le, and que are common on infinitive construct, so verbal uses are quite common with infinitive construct as well as nominal. But with the infinitive absolute, it really does lie more on the verbal side. However, before we move into Ross's examples, I want to show you a couple of examples of nominal uses, nominal examples of the infinitive absolute. And these come from SEO, page 250. And really, they function much like the infinitive construct does. So we have something like this. This is from Isaiah 22:13. Harog, bakar, v'shachot, tzon. Now, can you recognize the infinitive absolutes from their form? Remember, we have the kametz and the holem, right? Or holem vav, unless it's written defectively. And these are both written defectively. So you have kametz, holem, kametz, holem. So these are our 2 infinitive absolutes right here. This means, harag means to slay, and the way you would translate this is slaying cattle, and shachat means to slaughter or some other form of kill, and slaughtering tzon, which are sheep or goats. We can call them sheep here. Flocks, basically. Small domestic animals. So, slaying cattle and slaughtering sheep. These here are both functioning as nouns. Much the same way as we had before with the infinitive construct. I think it was obeying is better than sacrifice. And our obey here was, well, from shema to hear or obey. And it must have been something like that. Let me just check. Shemoah, right. And that was 1 Samuel 15:22. So here we had obeying is better than sacrifice with the infinitive construct. Here we have harog, slaying cattle and slaughtering sheep. Infinitive absolute, infinitive construct, both used nominally, both as subjects of a sentence. Very, very similar. One more example. This is from Proverbs 25:27, and also a SEO example from page 250. Achol devash harebot lo tov. Now, can you recognize the infinitive absolute here? Which is the one that has a kametz followed by a holem? Well, it's this one, right? Achol. Eating, devash is honey, or davash is honey. Here it's in the construct as a noun. Honey and rav can be used to talk about much or many. So eating a lot of honey is not good. Okay, this is a proverb. Eating a lot of honey is not good. And here again we see the infinitive absolute functioning as a noun, and in this sentence here as the subject. So those are 2 examples of how infinitive absolute can be used as a noun. In terms of verbal uses as verb or as an adverb, let's look at Ross's examples. He has 4 categories. The first is emphasis. The infinitive absolute can be used to emphasize, to increase the certainty or the uncertainty of the verb in question. We'll look at that in more detail in a moment. Complementary idea. This is where you use an infinitive absolute and it complements the main verb. It tends to give it, to say something about it continuing or about another action happening simultaneously with it. Again, I'll have to explain that more clearly when we get there. Sequence. This is where you have a main verb and then you have an infinitive absolute a little later that is carrying on the sense of the main verb. Just like we've seen already with, say, the perfect plus vav Vav consecutive can carry on the sense of a previous verb. Infinitive absolute can do the same thing. And then lastly, we have independent verb. An infinitive absolute can function just like a verb, or function as a verb, and particularly as imperatives. We see it as imperatives. So, let's look at the first category. Emphasis. This occurs when you have a verb, you have a main verb, let's put it over here, and you take that same verb and put it in the infinitive absolute form. So let's put it here. So we have two verbs with the same root. One is the main verb, perfect or imperfect or something, or imperative even, and the other one is the infinitive absolute of that same root. When you have that arrangement, and generally the infinitive absolute will be before, sometimes it's afterwards, when you have that arrangement, the infinitive absolute is emphasizing the main verb. And Seo says it is used to emphasize the certainty or decisiveness. If this is our absolute here, inf absolute, and this is the main verb, it is used to emphasize the certainty or decisiveness of the verbal idea of the root, which is shared by these, because it's the same root here and here. That's Seo, page 250. Ross adds something I think which is insightful, and that is that it not only emphasizes the action of this verb, but the mood. And I'll show you what I mean by that in these next examples. So we have three examples here, all from Ross, and it shows how the infinitive absolute will emphasize the mood as well as the action. So this first example is from Genesis 50, verse 24. Velohim pakod yifkod etchem. And this is Joseph on his deathbed, basically, speaking to his brothers after Jacob has already passed on. And he says, God, and we'll just ignore our infinitive absolute. This is our infinitive absolute, right? Kametz, holem. So we'll ignore that for a moment. God will visit you. So God won't forget you here in the land of Egypt, he's saying. But then he uses this infinitive absolute to emphasize it. God will certainly, or God will surely visit you. So this here is an affirmation. Ross says that this is strengthening the affirmation of the statement. Joseph wants to say more than God will visit you. He wants to impress upon his brothers that in fact it really will happen. So the fact that this is in the future is emphasized and strengthened by this. Okay, another example. Hamaloch timloch aleinu. And this also is from the Joseph story, but earlier. And here it's Joseph's brother speaking to him after he had his dreams about everyone bowing down to him. Here we have the interrogative hey, and in the last module I said that the infinitive construct can have either a vav or an interrogative hey. Remember that? It can't have the inseparable preposition, it can't have a pronominal suffix, but it can have the interrogative hey, and here we have an example of that. So, will, and let's ignore this, will you rule over us? His brothers ask him. But when you put this infinitive absolute in here, will you really rule over us? Will you indeed rule over us? So this infinitive absolute is emphasizing the main verb, and what it's doing is it's increasing the doubt that's already there. They are skeptical, right, of Joseph's dream that it'll really happen. They think it's ridiculous. So using this adds to that skepticism. Ross says it strengthens the doubt that's already implicit in that question. In this question, or this statement, God will surely visit you, the infinitive absolute strengthens the certainty that's built into that statement. And in this question, the infinitive absolute increases the doubt that's already in that question. So the infinitive absolute will push your statement or your question further in the direction that it's already going, or what it's already exhibiting. Okay, and the third example, This is God speaking to Adam about the trees in the garden. He says, Achol tochel. So instead of just saying, if you just had this word here, you may eat. This is a modal use of the imperfect. You may eat, you may freely eat. In other words, he's telling Adam, I really mean it. You can eat from any tree in the garden, except for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But from all the other ones, you can eat from any of them. And he's emphasizing his liberality and the modal use of the modal function of this verb here, that Adam can eat anything. He may eat it. He may indeed eat, or freely eat, something like that. So you have to kind of work with your English translation as to what is the appropriate word to communicate the increase in the existing mood in that statement. Or to put it simply, to increase or to communicate the emphasis. So that's the first verbal use, really kind of adverbial use, because it's modifying the main verb of the infinitive absolute. The second idea, or the second category, is complementary idea. And as I said before, this is the idea, or this is the category where the infinitive absolute takes the main verb and has it continue. There's the idea of continuous action or simultaneity. There's the idea of two things happening at the same time. Now, in the previous example here, with emphasis, we had one root, or we had a main verb, and we had a single infinitive absolute with the same root. What we're going to see here is that we'll have a main verb, and then we'll have an infinitive absolute with the same root as the main verb, and then another infinitive absolute with a different root. So here you work with two, and I guess the plural is infinitives absolute. I keep saying infinitive absolutes, but anyway. You work here with two infinitives absolutes, and one of them will have the same root as the main verb, and one of them will have a different root. Okay, let's look at an example before this gets too abstract. This is from Seo, page 251. Vayelech haloch ve'achol. And this is found in Judges 14, verse 9. It's talking about Samson after he found the honey in the carcass of the lion. What he does is he takes some honey, and then vayelech, this is a verb we'll deal with later because it's a weak verb, a irregular verb, halach, to go or to walk. He went, going and eating. So these are both infinitive absolutes, right? Kametz, holem, kametz, holem. This one is written properly or completely, and this is the plene writing, holem vav, and this is the defective writing without the vav. But they're both infinitive absolutes. This one is the same root as this, halach. The hay is dropped, but halach, and this is a different root. So we have our structure there. Two infinitives absolutes, one with the same root, the other with a different root from the main verb. And literally, he went along, or he went going and eating. He went along eating. As he was walking, as he was moving, he was eating, same time. So there's really both ideas here. These infinitive absolutes are adding the idea that the action is continuing, he's going along, and that two things are happening at the same time. He's eating as he's walking. Another example, halachu, haloch, v'ga'o. And this is in both Seo and Ross, and it comes from 1 Samuel 6, verse 12. This is again halach, but in the plural this time, perfect plural, 3CP. They went, going and lowing. This is the word to low, you can say that. The context here is these are the two milk cows that the Philistines have hooked up to a cart that's carrying the Ark of the Covenant from Ekron, and they sent it off because it was bringing them all kinds of bad luck. And so they sent off these two milk cows. They kept the calves behind, and the milk cows are going away from their calves, which is unnatural, and they go all the way up to Beth Shemesh. And as they go, they're lowing because their cows are behind them and they don't want to be separated. Halachu, haloch, v'ga'o. they went going and lowing, or they went along lowing. Again, a very similar, a parallel example to Samson going along eating. We have two infinitive absolutes. This one is the same root as this, halach, and this one is a different one. Now, the verb halach in particular almost takes on a technical or special meaning because it can be used almost like a adverb by itself to mean continuity or something happening continuously. Let me show you another example of that. Here we have v'hamayim, hahu, haloch, v'chasor. Okay, now can you find our infinitive absolutes here? We have kametz, holem vav, kametz, holem vav, right? So we have two infinitive absolutes, or in two infinitives absolute, I guess, how you're supposed to say it. And there are plenty of writings, so okay, we have them both here. Now what's our main verb? Hahu, right? This is not the same root as either of these. And yet you still have this idea of continuance happening. This is this is an example from Seo 251, and it is found in Genesis 8:5, and it talks about the waters after the flood. Now, the waters were, if you want to do this literally, were going, and this means chaser means to decrease. They were going and increasing, going and decreasing. Sorry, that doesn't make much sense though, because you can't translate this literally. What this is here, this is functioning as an adverb. It means now the waters were continually decreasing or continually abating. The waters can't walk. I suppose they could go a little bit, or go in some sense, but this here is not really functioning the same way it was over here. Here, with the cows and with Samson, they were literally walking. They were literally going. But when you move to the waters here, you don't have the same root, and here the waters aren't really in the same sense walking. It's more metaphorical. And so it's functioning as an adverb, meaning to continue. And this will be common. You'll see this a lot with this particular verb halach. In fact, it can even happen, I suppose because it happens like this in the infinite absolute, it also carries over this same usage into the participle of halach. I have an example of that, two examples. Well, two examples comparing it. This is vayelech, haloch, v'karev. He came, this is halach again, he came, haloch, v'karev. Karev is to approach. He kept approaching, okay? He came, coming and approaching. And this is from 2 Samuel 18:25. Again, these are both Seo examples, two of them here. And here's a parallel example. Very close, but different in the point we want to illustrate here. Vayelech ha-Pilishti holech v'karev. The Philistine was coming, was walking, and approaching. Okay, but you don't translate it that way. Here, this one and this one are functioning adverbially. He kept approaching, the Philistine kept approaching. This, by the way, is 2 Samuel 18:25, and this one is 1 Samuel 17:41. So, compare this here. These two are exactly the same, vayelech. These two here, karev, these are exactly the same. Now, just as an aside, remember with statives, the perfect 3ms, the participle masculine singular, and the adjective masculine singular all have the same form. So this here is probably, I would say, is the participle. Anyway, these are the same. Here, all we've done down here is we've added a extra subject. Here it's simply he kept approaching. Here it's the Philistine kept approaching. But the point of contrast is this one and this one, right? This is a infinitive absolute, kametz, holem vav. This one is holem tzere, which is our participle, right? It means the same thing though. So here we see a participle functioning just the way this infinitive absolute of halach does, in this adverbial sense of continuing. He kept approaching. The Philistine kept approaching. Okay, so that's the idea of complementary action. Generally with two infinitives absolutes, except when you have halach, it can function by itself as a adverb to mean to continue. Our third example is sequence. This is a simple one, just one example here. What this basically is you have a verb, then you have down the line somewhere a vav with an infinitive absolute. And the infinitive absolute is functioning the same way this main verb is. So it carries on the meaning of this, just like you have a perfect plus vav consecutive. And so here's a Ross example here. Pakadti v'shaloach. I visited and I sent. I visited and sent, something like that. Or I have visited and I have sent. So whatever this is going to have the same translation value. This is a perfect, pakadti, okay, suffix at the end. This one has a kametz and a holem vav, and so that's our absolute right here. So it's functioning just like the perfect is. Notice we have an extra patach there. That's our furtive patach. Normally the furtive patach is written a little bit to the right, something like this. I can't do that with this font. This is the SBL font, and it doesn't do the furtive patach, so have to forgive me on that one. Okay, sequence. So infinitive absolute can carry on a sequence that's started by something else. Lastly, independent verb. Now this is usually the imperative. The infinitive absolute can function just like a verb in some instances. The famous example here is from the Ten Commandments, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat. And again, the infinitive absolute is here. We have a kametz and a holem vav from Zachar, meaning to remember. Remember the Sabbath day. And this is Exodus 20, verse 8. And if you turn to the other account of the Ten Commandments in Deuteronomy, we find Shamor et Yom HaShabbat. Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, Shamor et Yom HaShabbat. And this is Deuteronomy 5:12. So here it says remember the Sabbath day. Here it says keep the Sabbath day. Keep or guard. But again, both of them are infinitives absolute, right? Kametz, holem vav. And they're both functioning as imperatives. These are commands. You can't get any more command-like than the Ten Commandments. And the last example is this one here. Haloch v'debarta el David. This is 2 Samuel 24:12. And can you tell which one is our infinitive absolute? This one, right? Kametz, holem vav. And this here is what? With a ta at the end, there's a perfect, right? And if you have the pointed text or the cantillated text with the accent marks, you'll see the accent falls here. So we stress the end, which tells us, not that we really needed that, but it tells us that we have a vakotel t, right? A perfect that's functioning with a vav conversive. V'debarta. The stress is here at the end. The stress is shifted. So, go and speak to David. So here we have go, or halach, functioning as an imperative. Haloch, go. And then this here is a perfect plus vav consecutive, carrying on the sense of the imperative, which is expressed by the infinitive absolute. So really what this is a, what did we call this? A volative chain? No. This would be a future tense chain, right? Actually, it's both. This is the one that, because this is functioning as an imperative, I suppose you could call this a volative chain, because imperative is a volative, even though our form here is infinitive absolute. Or you could refer to this as the future time narrative sequence. If you go back to our three different types of sequences so far. Past time narrative sequence, future time narrative sequence, volative sequence, and I suppose this here infinitive absolute sequence, although this is much more minor than the other ones. So, infinitive absolute can be used, let's get back to our screen here, for emphasis, as a complementary idea of simultaneity or continuing action, especially with halach, which can function as a sort of special adverb, as a sequence, carrying on whatever was going before, and as a verb, especially as imperatives. And then, of course, there are some nominal uses, although they aren't as common.